Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Herbal Healing. We're here in the gardens at Wakehurst in Sussex and we're going to be taking a look at some of the best herbs for IBS. In natural medicine, we don't recognise IBS as a standalone disease because essentially it's just a collection of symptoms. And from our point of view, it's very important to understand what's behind those symptoms. We need to get back to the cause. And that's what differs between our approach and the approach of standard medicine, who really invented the term IBS as an umbrella to cover a lot of these symptoms that we'll be talking about. So some of the causes behind these symptoms, for example, poorly functioning digestion resulting in undigested food entering the lower part of the digestive tract and actually causing irritable reactions or irritating reactions. Another frequent cause is bacterial imbalance, where the gut flora, the microbial population of our guts, has become disturbed and unbalanced. And also parasites. We're going to be looking at one particular herb that can help us with that problem as well, because they're remarkably common and they can give very similar symptoms to the kind of things we talk about when we use the term IBS. So come with me on this episode and I'm going to show you what these plants are, how to identify them, very importantly, how we can use them to best effect to relieve those troublesome symptoms of IBS. What we have here is fennel, Feniculum vulgare. This is a plant that's known the world over as a digestive aid and remedy. First of all, I just want you to get an eyeful of this. This is just coming to the end of its flowering season. You can see the very sort of intense, rather lovely yellow flowers here, and then they're giving way to this kind of these greenish seed pods here. These of course will ripen off in the course of the next few weeks and give us literally thousands of wonderful fennel seeds. Fennel seeds of course are the part of the plant that we actually use, but before we go to that, let's have a quick look at the rest of the plant and just get a sense of how we might identify it if we were to come across it. It does grow wild in many places, prefers a more sort of Mediterranean climate, which is pretty much what we've got going on here today. It's a very delicate plant. You know, it's tall, it's elegant, it's slender. It has these very fine feathery leaves, very characteristic of this plant, and these beautiful bluish green stems that sort of broaden out into these flower and seed heads. It's a member of a very well-known family that gives us loads of herbs, medicinal herbs, and also of course food plants as well. It's sometimes called the carrot family. Now these are plants that are very high in what we call volatile oils. These are very potent phytochemical or plant chemical constituents, and usually what they do is they're kind of relaxing and antispasmodic. That means that if anything's a little bit uptight, then it can loosen it up nicely, and that's one of the things that this plant does, that these seeds do when you take them internally. So we would use this in order to assist digestive function by getting lots of good secretions from the stomach particularly, but also to some extent from the liver, gallbladder and the pancreas to help with the digestion of food. This plant has a certain bitterness to it. It's what we call a hot bitter. There's a word for it in Western herbal medicine. We call it carminative. Nothing to do with calm or calming things, although it does have that effect. And that word means to relax the digestive tract itself, but also to dispel gas. This is one of the main herbs that we would use. If you were a little bit bloated, a little bit gassy, and you just wanted to get rid of that, it moves it on very effectively indeed. It also has microbial controlling properties. We don't like to say antimicrobial anymore because of course there's a lot of microbes in the gut that we actually need there, but this one will help to modulate the environment of the gut so that we get to keep the ones that we need. You can't really say enough about this plant in terms of its digestive enhancing activities, and it's a very easy plant to use. And quite often when we use the seeds of plants, we want to decoct. That means we actually boil them up and cook them for a bit. You don't need to do that with fennel. Because of the volatile oil content in them, they readily give up their properties to a simple infusion. One of the best ways we have to use this plant is making a very simple herbal tea. All you need is 1 or 2 teaspoons of the seeds in the bottom of a cup. Just pour over your freshly boiled water and leave it to stand for about 10 minutes. Very good for after a meal, particularly a heavy meal. You might be struggling to digest, you might be sitting there feeling a bit bloated, like it's not going anywhere. cup of fennel seed tea, and it's going to move it on really nicely. One of the major symptoms of IBS, of course, is bloating, wind, flatulence, very often not going anywhere. Sometimes we call that colic. This is one of the main plants that we would use to treat that situation. It really helps to move that on, dispel the gas, and calm everything down. Here we have wormwood, Artemisia absinthium. This is a garden variety of the plant. Some varieties are actually much, much taller than this, but however tall it is, they have very similar characteristics. And in particular, the common wormwood has this beautiful silvery green foliage, very, very fine, very delicate, but actually quite robust as well. So at the moment you can see all these, if you come up really close, you can see all these tiny little buds here that will eventually come and give you a little show of little yellow flowers. So of course it's called wormwood because it is effective against worms. If you set out to kill parasites, you're going to have a really rough time. There are very successful species on the planet, and they of course depend on us as hosts. So we don't want to even think about getting rid of them, because in the symbiosis of nature we can expect that they also have their role to play, but we don't want them necessarily messing with our digestive tract. So what we do, rather than talking about anti-parasitic herbs, we would call this a herb that gently persuades the parasites that it's not a nice place for them to stay. Now this plant contains some very powerful volatile principles, amongst them a chemical called thuone, and if you rub the leaves very gently between your fingers and take a sniff, you've got a sense of how powerful that is. It's really quite pungent. Thuone is actually quite a toxin as well, so we need to be careful how we use this plant. We don't want to use it for long periods, and we don't want to use too much of it. So you might recognise from the Latin name, Artemisia absinthium, that this also has a connection with the alcoholic beverage absinthe, and indeed it does. And interestingly, absinthe, of course, which is a drink in its own right, but the wormwood, of course, is the major ingredient there, as it is of several other drinks that go under the general umbrella name of aperitif. The purpose of an aperitif is to open up the digestion so that it's capable of performing its role in converting food for you. And we mentioned, of course, that one of the possible causes of IBS is that the stomach and the sort of upper digestion is not performing its job efficiently. So aperitifs are all about opening up digestion, and that means promoting the flow of digestive secretions, acid from the stomach, bile from the liver, pancreatic juices from the pancreas, so that we get that cocktail of juices that help us to break down food effectively, so that when they pass into the lower end of the digestive tract, the colon particularly, they don't set up unwanted irritable reactions. So that's what we've got with irritable bowel syndrome. Of course, it's one of the possible causes. Now, there are some powerful chemicals in this plant, as we've mentioned, and we do want to be careful with it. So generally speaking, very small amounts as what we might call a bitter tonic. Now, the best way to take this plant is in the form of a tincture, where we can get very small doses very nicely with drops. You don't really want more than about 2 or 3, 4 or 5 at the most drops of this plant. And the idea behind a bitter tonic is you don't need much of it. It will actually work as soon as you put it on the tongue. So it works by reflex from the taste buds in the tongue telling your stomach to start secreting. Very clever. But it's also a fantastic gastrointestinal antiseptic, if you like. So as I said, that word is not so much about killing bugs or killing bacteria as restoring the natural balance of your gut, so that we don't have too much of what we don't need, and we allow the beneficial bacteria to grow as they should. This plant is meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria. And many people don't know this, but it was the original source material for aspirin. Most people now think, and in fact it is true to some extent, that aspirin came from the white willow bark, but actually it was first isolated from filipendula. The name of meadowsweet before it became filipendula, botanically speaking, was spirea, and that's actually where aspirin gets its name from. So in the gastrointestinal tract, this plant can perform wonders for us. As the connection with aspirin might seem to indicate, it has a role in controlling inflammation. So anywhere in your digestive tract where you have inflammation, irritable bowel disease, which we've been talking about, is also in its way a manifestation of inflammation. It follows somewhat different pathways to inflammatory bowel disease, but it is a hot, irritated condition. And what we have here is a cold, soothing, demulcent herb. It's particularly valuable for the treatment of gastroesophageal reflux. That's where you get food coming up the wrong way. Not only does it protect the stomach lining and the esophagus from the effects of acid going up the wrong way, but it also has the ability to protect against the possible ill effects that we know aspirin has. So one of the downsides of using aspirin for any reason is that it actually, as they say, rots the stomach lining. This will actually protect your stomach lining whilst at the same time calming down the inflammation and also, of course, astringing the stomach lining, which means that it kind of tightens it up and makes it a little bit more impervious to any kind of damage. And that astringent quality of meadowsweet is also extremely useful in the lower part of the digestive tract. The failure of the small intestine to keep things from getting into the blood supply that you don't want there is often a problem in IBS and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and that sort of thing. This plant can come along and really seal up those leaky, tight junctions, as they're called. But lower down in the colon, it can also act as a really, really good remedy for mild diarrhea. Now, from an identification point of view, it's quite important that we get the right plant here, because if we just take a quick look around here, there are a few plants that have vaguely similar flower heads, and if you're not used to the fine details of botanical identification, you could easily get confused. There's one thing about this plant that gives it away. Many members of the rose family have this particular feature, and in fact, almond is a member of the rose family, and that's what gives it away. It's a fantastic, fragrant, almondy scent that just comes off these flowers. I don't even have to get particularly close up. This whole little area where I'm standing, you walk into it, you immediately know that there's meadowsweet. So if you want to have a closer look at the flowers, you can also get some other clues to identification. When you look at them like this, they are distinguished by the fact they almost look fuzzy. And the reason they look fuzzy is because they have these myriad stamens. Each of these tiny little flowers that forms the flower head has about a dozen or so stamens. Stamens are the pollen-giving feature or structure in the plant. So that's what gives it this kind of furry, fuzzy, kind of indistinct appearance. Now, how do we use this plant? First of all, which part of it do we use? And we use anything above the ground. The stalks are a bit tough. We could probably do without those, but the leaves and the flowers in full bloom. You can see some of these have gone to seed right now, so they're a little bit past it, but these ones are absolutely fine. But there are two main ways I want to discuss of using it. First of all, a tea of the fresh flowers is absolutely wonderful, really soothing, very, very pleasant to taste, and really, really settling on an upset stomach. And secondly, we can take the whole plant, powder it, mix it into water and use it as almost the way you would use an antacid mix of some kind to swallow in the case of actual symptoms of gastroesophageal reflux disorder or gastritis or any of those conditions that are inflamed stomach lining, esophageal lining. The tea is probably best to go for if you have diarrhea, by the way. So if you have a case of mild diarrhea, and remember when you're treating diarrhea, you don't want to stop it dead in its tracks all the time. You want to slow it down a little bit, because if you stop it dead in its tracks and there's something microbial in there, then it's going to multiply and give you more of a problem. But if you've got a mild functional kind of diarrhea, the kind of diarrhea that you might get if you have I.B.S, then a tea of this plant, taken maybe 2 or 3 times a day, is wonderful. So if you suffer from any of the symptoms of I.B.S, why not try these herbs? They're really simple to make and use. And if you're still not sure how to make them up, then have a watch of some of our other videos where we take you through a step-by-step process in how to make herbal teas, tinctures, and decoctions. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for all our upcoming videos. And until next time, take good care of yourselves.